else mind if they're
No.
Does anybody mind?
I need to sign a waiver.
Have you ever seen Max do that where he
Okay.
spins around?
Do you know who I am?
Okay. Thank you anyway for having me
Thank you.
come out here, and I'm actually going to read a small section for the first time from in the book. That's that, and they just printed this today. Okay. My brother Brendan and I take a job painting the outside of a neighbour's house. It's the first time we've worked together, and we begin to form a brotherly bond we never had growing up. He wants to hear my stories of London. He wants to know if I will take him with me the next time I go. We even managed to go out for a few drinks together and share a few laughs. It's summer, and the long bright afternoons have a tranquil and timeless air about them. I sense for the first time an enormous quiet to the countryside. The damp aroma of freshly cut lawn grass seeps into my pores. It soothes me. Brendan and I are in no hurry to finish the house we are painting. We are working for ourselves, so we can come and go as we please. We are listening to the radio as we work. One day, when the news breaks that there has been a shootout in Loughgall the previous evening, 8 members of the Provisional IRA have been shot and killed in an ambush by the SAS. We put down our paint buckets and rush to the small radio on the windowsill and stand there frozen, paintbrushes in hand, waiting for more, waiting for the names. It had happened so close to home that we were sure to know at least some of them. The lads I knew from Galbally, the Arthurs and Donnelly clans were all from that same area. There would be a chance that we would know at least some of the names, or that we would have some connection to them one way or the other. But the names were not released. Not just yet. We would hear them soon enough. We had no sooner heard the news flash when we heard the first signs of a British Army helicopter in the distance rising out of the army base in Omagh. We watched it, the buzz growing into a more definable choppa 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 as it approached, and we tilted our heads back to stare up at its dark green belly as it passed directly over our heads, not more than a couple of 100 feet off the ground. A gunner perched in the open side door scanning the countryside for the flash of a rocket launcher or a gunman's barrel in a bush, and on it went towards Loughgall. We put our things away, unable to continue working without knowing more, and started out the lane to the road. I had the sick feeling of death in my gut. Of course I would know some of the names. I looked up suddenly, hearing the low, mournful bray of an animal in pain. In the next field stood a tall black horse. Her belly was swollen and she was tipping her head back. Sorry, it's my phone. She was tipping her head back, throwing her great cry into the air. Our neighbour Sean Donnelly hopped a fence on the far end of the field, carrying a length of rope, and hurried towards the horse as he called out for us to come. We climbed the gate and hurried toward the horse, meeting her midway. She stood silent, and you could hear her belly clamping. You could see her belly clamping against it, but the foal would not come. I might need some help with her, Sean said, as he tied a slip knot on the rope. She's stuck in there. What do we do? I asked. I had never witnessed the birth of a foal, much less one in trouble. Just watch for her now, he said, as he worked his hand up inside her with the rope, and she dipped her head and pushed, sending a great gusher of greenish yellow water out along his arm, soaking him from the neck down. That's just her water breaking. She's all right, he said, responding to the shock on my face. I almost have it. I swatted a dung fly from her face and put my hand on her neck and gave her a rub to let her know that we were there to help. Got it, Sean said, taking his hand out and rubbing the thick slime and blood off on the front of his shirt. He got a hand on her haunch and leaned back, pulling the rope and directing Brendan to the other side of her to hold the tail up as the 2 front hooves started to show. The legs came out and the head between them in a transparent envelope of skin. She started to go down then, the big horse, her back legs buckling, the front folding too. Just watch she doesn't come down on you, Sean said, taking a step away from her to let her settle. Just let her roll onto her side. It'll be easier on her. When she was all the way down, she lay panting, and you could see the muscles wrestling for the last big push, and the foal slipped from her easily then, settling motionless in the wet grass behind her. Sean untied the rope from the foal's ankles and hooked his fingers into her nostrils, clearing the slime from her nose and her mouth to make sure she could breathe. Is it alive? Brendan asked. "It's alive, all right." "Is it all right?" I said, not seeing any movement. The horse lay silent too, her belly shuddering, her legs threading the air. "We'll see in a minute," Sean said, standing away from her now that she was cleaned, and we watched as the foal rolled a little and put her 2 front legs under her and pushed herself up, bringing the back legs into position as she stood. "By God, she's a fighter," Sean said, with a gleam of pride in his eyes. "She might have been better off where she was," I said. "What the hell's going on today?" Sean asked as we watched another helicopter appear from over beyond Formas in the direction of Carrickmore. It was a black dot in the sky, no bigger than a fly, but there was no mistaking that sound. We looked away from the foal for a moment and watched as it grew larger off beyond Dunmoyle Chapel in the distance and on toward the Rabbit Borough towards Lochgall. "You didn't hear the news?" I said. "No, what happened?" 8 IRA shot dead in Lochgall, Brendy said. "Holy fuck, when?" "It happened last night. We just heard it on the radio now." "No names?" "Not yet." We turned for a moment, the 3 of us in silence, to watch the foal make her way to her mother's head, to rub their noses together for the first time, and stare at each other as the noise of the helicopter faded off into the distance. She cocked her head towards us too, and seemed to regard us for a moment, the 3 sombre faces of the men who'd helped deliver her into this peculiar new world. Here was how all life began in the grey north. We slipped from our mothers in innocence and joy, but when we opened our eyes to see, there was death too in this fragile inheritance. We turned and headed back across the field for home. We could hear the names of those, we had lost. Within a matter of hours, everyone in the British Isles would know of Lochgall. 8 young IRA men had been slaughtered. 2 innocent civilians who just happened to drive into the massacre accidentally were also riddled with bullets by the SAS. The 2 brothers, Anthony and Oliver Hughes, were on their way home from work. Anthony died on the scene. Oliver was taken to Royal Victoria in Belfast, where he recovered. The massacre at Lochgall represented the largest loss of life for the IRA in a single incident in the history of the Troubles. Upon hearing the first names announced, my mind went blank for a moment, as if a white sheet had been flapped in the air and draped over my memory. Then, in the clear white of the past, I could see the faces of the 2 young boys I had first wrestled with in Kelly's Inn not 2 years before. Boys I had fought and drank and laughed with, and whose families I had come to know and love. 21-year-old Declan Arthurs and 19-year-old Seamus Donnelly. Excuse me. Were dead. I'd just spent the previous year living in London with some of their older brothers. Paul, Patrick and Damien were all part of our close-knit circle of friends on Church End Estate. These boys were among my best friends. Just weeks earlier we had all been together in the White Horse Tavern like a family, the whole group of us sitting around a table by the open fire on a Saturday morning, talking, taking turns, buying rounds of beer, smoking cigarettes, telling yarns and laughing while we waited for our clothes to dry at the laundromat across the street. I thought immediately of Martina. Seamus Donnelly was her brother. I thought of calling the kiosk in the hopes that I might be able to get in touch with her. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was, how angry I was, but it was pointless. She and Damien would have been on their way home by then, or perhaps she was back already to Tyrone for the wakes and burials. My mother had us kneel to say a decade of the rosary for their souls. Prayer was the language she knew best to convey to me that she acknowledged the pain I must be in. My stomach churned at the thought of what my good friends must be going through, and my mind began to race with thoughts of rage and bloody revenge. I went back to the list of names again and again, hoping for a different result, but no matter how many times I visited, the list remained the same. Patrick Kelly, 32. Patrick McKierney, 32. Jim Lina, 31. Jerry O'Callaghan, 29. Eugene Kelly, 25. Tony Gormley, 25. Declan Arthurs, 21. Seamus Donnelly, 19. The days of the wakes, the sky over Tyrone was heavy with the brattle of British helicopter blades. They hung in deliberate provocation in the air over the small cottages of the deceased, low enough that we had to lean into one another to hear what was being said, as we huddled in small groups, smoking and talking and moving gravel with our toes as we waited our turn to pay our respects. There were cars crammed bumper to bumper all the way down the lane and up the road a half mile on either side of the Donnelly house by the time we arrived. It had been the same over at the Kelly and Arthur's households. The narrow roads around Galbally were littered with parked cars. The turnout was enormous. The families of the dead boys had agreed to leave the caskets open so that we might bear witness to the carnage that had taken place. When my time came to enter the Donnelly house, I joined the queue and took the hands of those who were on the receiving line. The family members, whom I did not know personally, were easily discernible by the measure of grief their faces bore. I was not prepared to see my close friend Damien in this surreal scene, just as I had not been ready to see Paul and Patrick standing next to their younger brother's coffin over at the Arthur's house moments before. These were my good friends, tough men, the very toughest. To witness their pain and the dignity with which they bore it, greeting every guest with a warm handshake and a smile and a sincere thanks for coming, was almost too much to bear. I entered the small, dim room where the coffin lay, draped in an Irish flag and bookended by a pair of IRA men in full uniform bearing rifles, their identities concealed in the traditional black balaclavas. The remaining family members, the women and the elderly, sat around the perimeter of the room with sombre faces, their hands clutching handkerchiefs in their laps. Martina leapt from the chair and threw her arms around my neck and sobbed, "Look what they did to him, look what they did to my brother." I held her tightly and forced myself to see over her shoulder as she sobbed. I took a good long look at what was left of the boy's face. Seamus, this beautiful 19-year-old boy, all shot to bits like the others, young men slaughtered mercilessly when they could just as easily have been taken alive. Witnesses from the village said the boys were never given an opportunity to surrender, even though they were surrounded by an SAS ambush squad. This was how justice worked under Thatcher's shoot-to-kill policy. The SAS had obviously picked up information well in advance of the attack, long enough to conceal themselves in the bushes surrounding the Loughgall police station so that they could lie in wait for the van load of boys to arrive. They had many hours to contemplate the arrival of these young Irish rebels. They could just as easily have used that time and information to arrest the boys long before they reached their destination. There were whispers of villagers who had witnessed the event saying that the boys had been taken alive and lined up alongside the road and shot one by one in the face, and then dragged and kicked and beaten, guns placed in their hands for the British propaganda pictures. These were tactics the SAS had used elsewhere. There were similar assassinations taking place all over the north, but not all of them had witnesses to verify the slaughter. But we knew, we the neighbours of these boys knew, we understood that what had happened here in Loughgall was calculated, premeditated murder. We didn't need to wait for a court's decision or a team of forensic experts or lawyers or an English courtroom to verify what had happened here. It was blatantly obvious. The British government wanted these boys dead, so they killed them. These were not innocents who lay before us. Everyone in this room understood that this was war, but the boy in this box should have still held breath, should have still played and fought and dreamed. Should have, if justice had any place in what had happened here. I can't take it, Colin, I can't take it, Martina cried. I want Seamus back. I want my brother back. The room was filling up behind me as she clutched me tightly and I whispered hollow, useless words in her ear. I'm sorry, I'll call you soon. It's going to be okay. I put my head down and turned to leave, out the narrow hall, down the gravel street, past the hordes of mourners and the long row of cars, with the fresh and bleeding hate and the virgin heart of a killer.
You have to put it on YouTube. I don't know how to do it.